Greetings, everyone. I'm Simone Sanders Townsend in for Stephanie Rule. It is day 115 of the second Trump administration, and welcome to the midweek nightcap. The president's tour of the Middle East continued with a state visit to the Gulf nation of Qatar, which he called a funder of terrorism in 2017. Well, fast forward to Trump's second term and his announcement today that the country's airline agreed to purchase more than 200 new planes from Boeing. The luxury jet that Qatar plans to give Trump was not discussed, but the country's prime minister addressed it on Fox News.
Really unfair accusations for Qatar's trying to buy influence. Throughout, the last 25 years or 30 years, you will find Qatar always by the side of the U.S. in many areas and many things.
That assurance will probably do little to stem the growing concerns about this exchange. An NBC News analysis found that it would cost $1 billion and several years to turn the 747 into Air Force One. Say that 5 times. And taxpayers would likely have to foot the bill. Our own Garrett Hake has more on day 2 of Trump's Mideast trip.
Trump is the first president to visit Qatar in more than 2 decades, which is home to America's largest Middle Eastern military base, but has also drawn criticism, including from the president, over its close ties with Hamas.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level.
And the president facing more Republican blowback over his plan to accept a $400 million luxury jet from Qatar, gifted to the Pentagon to serve as a temporary Air Force One, amid Boeing's ongoing delays delivering a replacement.
How do you know something's not implanted and it doesn't blow it up? So obviously there's a security concern there.
I can think of a lot of other things Qatar could do for us, like, for example, quit harboring Islamic jihadist terrorists who are trying to kill Americans.
Overnight, the president defending his decision on the deal, which has not yet been finalized.
With the United States of America, I believe that we should have the most impressive plan. Now, some people say, oh, you shouldn't accept gifts for the country. My attitude is, why wouldn't I accept a gift? We're giving to everybody else. Why wouldn't I accept a gift? Because it's going to be a couple of years, I think, before the Boeings are finished.
And this morning, President Trump meeting briefly with the new Syrian president, a former al-Qaeda member who broke with the group and once had a $10 million U.S. bounty on his head before deposing dictator Bashar al-Assad. Trump lifting U.S. sanctions on the new Syrian government at the request of Saudi Arabia and Turkey.
He's got the potential. He's a real leader. And, he led a charge, and he's pretty amazing.
With that, let's bring in our nightcap. Melanie Zanona, NBC Capitol Hill correspondent. Jason Johnson, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University. He's also an MSNBC political contributor. And Sam Stein, managing editor for The Bulwark and MSNBC political contributor. Well, I would like to say that Qatar versus Qatar is the blue dress of 2025 thus far. I just want to put that out there, okay? Sam, okay. Donald Trump's foreign policy strategy is touting billions in foreign investment with very few details. And to me, it feels like he is not necessarily operating as an American president, but really as an arm of some of his businesses, and like he's a businessman. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the central thesis of this trip is let's go make some deals, right? It's bring not just world leaders together, but tech leaders, business leaders, cut deals, some astronomical sums of money being thrown around or being reported as being thrown around. But then if you, of course, get to the details, it's much vaguer. And it's, I don't want to sound like I'm adopting a cliche, but it is a realignment of basic American foreign policy. The first trip overseas to petrostate autocrats, cutting deals with them, cozying up to them, saying of MBS, I may love him too much, all the while simultaneously launching trade wars and attacks on democratic allies. It is kind of a dizzying reorientation of U.S. foreign policy, but it does sort of fit the Trump pattern, which is he kind of marvels at their ability to do what they do. He kind of wishes he had the flexibility that comes with an autocracy, and he's not really even hiding it.
One of the Mideast experts told the Washington Post that monarchs in the region really don't distinguish between their personal interests and national interests. And Jason, it feels like Donald Trump is like, yeah, we want to do that.
The man showed up and got a free plane. Okay, a free plane. We can stop.
That he might not even take because Republicans and Democrats are pushing back.
Which makes it worse, right? Look, because look, the way that these things used to work in a semi-functional, non-authoritarian regime is that when you met a foreign leader, they might give you, like, I don't know, a jersey from a team that won the World Cup or a ring or something else like that. What they don't do is give you planes, right? So that's a sign already of how Trump operates, which we all have problems with. But if you get into the details, Pam Bondi used to be on the Qatar payroll. The Trump Foundation wants to build like a golf course there. This is a personal business trip that Donald Trump is taking at the taxpayer's expense. That's what this whole thing is about. That's what it should be reported as. And what bothers me the most is that Republicans can sit there and say, we don't like the plane, but all the other deals that are being done, all the other deals that are being done that personally benefit him and don't help the taxpayer, they don't have anything to say about it.
You know, and I had lots of qualms with the plane. Sam and I were talking about it in the makeup room, and I said, nobody is talking about how this plane, he won't even be able to use it as Air Force One because it has to be outfitted. And Sam's like, lots of people are actually talking about it. He's like, people are talking about it. We're talking about it right here. Okay, look, Melanie, we also saw Trump with the new leader of Syria. And I do think it is important to note that the president is talking about lifting sanctions. Some Democrats are giving cautious praise on this to the president, actually. I want to know what you're hearing, because only Congress can take the leader off of that terrorist watch list, can lift the sanctions. Right. Donald Trump cannot do this unilaterally, so I'm surprised, actually, by the praise that some Democrats have offered up.
Yeah, Democrats are pretty reluctant to praise Trump on just about anything, so it was interesting to see a handful, not many, but a handful of Democrats come out and praise him on lifting those sanctions from Syria. But Republicans, on the other hand, were not coming out and supporting him for this. I think behind the scenes, there is a lot of consternation amongst your more traditional hawks, your old school Republicans, your Lindsey Grahams of the world, for example, who are still trying to reorient themselves around this new MAGA world foreign policy order. And I think this trip in the Middle East is just a perfect example of how Trump has really taken a more transactional approach to the presidency, but also, to Sam's point, you know, slapping tariffs on allies and then cozying up to people that were once considered, you know, taboo to even take meetings with at one point.
Not even taboo. The current leader of Syria was literally the founder of the Al-Qaeda chapter in Syria.
Yes.
He was a jihadist. Yes. He has disavowed, he has disavowed it. So I guess I could say he was a former alleged jihadist. But it is unconscionable. For me, as someone that used to work in the federal government, who used to work for an American president, this is unconscionable.
But it's not surprising, right? I mean, this is why none of our allies want to share national security information with us anymore. This is why, you know, our European allies are like, look, we got to reorient ourselves for the next 20, 25 years. Because you have a foreign policy. We don't have foreign policy anymore. What we have is whatever Trump's personal business interests are. So since we don't know what that is when he wakes up every day, it leaves the rest of the world trying to figure out and scramble one way or another. We no longer have foreign policy. And that's the dangerous thing, because this is a part of a world that matters. The resources there matter. Our relationships there matter. But we don't know if we can do anything with it because we don't know what Trump's going to care about day in, day out.
Well, you know, I think some people would say, well, we don't have a foreign policy that we're used to. I guess we're going to all keep going back to the point Sam made. You've got, this is New York Times reporting, and I'm going to read it. Qatar, depending on who you are today, has continued to try and transform its reputation in the global community, in part by spending millions of dollars on lobbyists in Washington and other capitals. Among those lobbyists was Pam Bondi, now Mr. Trump's attorney general. It seems like their investment is paying off.
Well, again,
no one knew she was going to be the attorney general. She was not the first pick, to be clear. Right. She was the second.
True, but you know, when foreign governments make these investments, it's long-term investment here. We keep going back to the same word, transactional, and I think that's really what defines this, which is, if you're the government of Qatar, you look at Donald Trump and you say, what's the best way to earn his favor? And it's not, you know, by appealing to his epic humanitarian record or his morality or anything like that. It's to give him a gift, or it's to hire a lobbyist who has good access to him, or it's to hire a lobbying shop that has good access to Washington, D.C. And so in each of these cases, and I would even tie it back into the decision to lift the Syrian sanctions, what Trump is doing is he's saying, what's the most immediate need that I have to satisfy, and how can I get through that transaction? In the case of the Syrian sanctions lift, look, I mean, the sanctions regime was put in place to cripple the Bashar al-Assad regime. It accomplished that goal. that's one reason to lift it, is to give the new government a chance to actually succeed and actually lure them into sort of a U.S. Foreign policy sphere. But the other goal is because this is what the other Arab states were asking for from Donald Trump, and he wanted to deliver to it. I would say he did it in probably the most Trumpian way, which is he just announced it. It seems like a lot of people were surprised by it.
We have to give them a chance. I mean, the people were clapping in the room.
I think you can defend that. I think what's problematic and tricky is saying, is this being done with foresight, with thoughtful processes? Has he consulted members of Congress? Has he done any sort of the traditional State Department planning?
But consulting with the Congress part is the point. It is Congress gets to decide. Congress is supposed to decide here. Not only did he consult, is Congress going to pass some legislation?
I highly doubt that.
Yeah, they're not interested in it. And here's the thing that I think is important. Broken clocks and all that. The one thing that Donald Trump, yeah, exactly. The one thing that Donald Trump does on the Strip that's nice is lifting sanctions. It doesn't change all the other terrible things that he does. I mean, like, the low-level standard that this man is held to from the standpoint of, like, well, you set the entire house on fire, but you save some Oreo cookies. I mean, come on. The house is on fire, right? We're in a house on fire situation. So I'm not impressed. I think that any Democrat who praises this president under any circumstances is foolish and naive. And depending on what ends up happening with Syria, maybe we can be happy about these particular sanctions, but all the other deals and all the other negotiations are not to the benefit of this country.
I mean, the points about Bashar al-Assad is no longer in charge. His regime has been toppled. We do need to wait and see, but there are processes in place. Let's take a turn and talk about tariffs, because the tariffs, the lower Chinese tariffs, Sam, they do come into play today. They take effect. But NBC News says that Trump's trade war wins so far are more talk, uncertainty, and new deadlines. Washington Post is noting that he's issued new or revised tariff policies more than 50 times.
I saw that.
I don't know. Does this sound like the art of the deal to you?
Well, no. It sounds chaotic. And I think if you're anyone who works in business and you're saying, wait a second, in like 2 months, we've had 50 different tariffs. How am I supposed to plan in the next 2 months ahead? Will those China sanctions get put back in? He said it's not going to be at 145%, but what will they end up at? You know, they have said a 10% minimum standard, but frankly, they also said they would never negotiate. So it's really difficult to trust or plan around the tariff regime. And I think, you know, you talk to anyone on the Hill or in business, they're relieved that he backed away from the most profound tariff levels with China. But 30% is still a lot. It's going to reorient our economy in profound ways. It's going to have an economic impact in profound ways. And just because we have relief now doesn't mean we're not going to have pain later.
I mean, 30%, to be clear, is one of the highest tariff rates in the history of this country since, you know, we're almost about to celebrate 250 years. So it is of note. What is Congress talking about on this point, Melanie? I mean, they are also in the thick of negotiations, if we're going to call it that. I mean, Mike Johnson is having to contend with Republicans in his own caucus loudly criticizing what I can just describe as his leadership on the negotiations of this bill. There are folks out there from Tim Burchett to Chip Roy and others who are like, we don't like it. And then in the Senate side, you've got Josh Hawley saying, no Medicaid cuts ever. I'm not voting for that.
Yeah, we're getting into the really ugly phase of the negotiations. This happens when it starts to get towards the finish line. It's probably only going to get messier before it gets better, if I'm being honest. The issue with Speaker Mike Johnson is that some of these criticisms sound a lot like actually Kevin McCarthy, his predecessor, who was booted, where he made all these promises and he couldn't keep them. For Speaker Mike Johnson, he has now been in this job for over a year. He didn't have the baggage initially. That's why he was elected Speaker after they cycled through all these other candidates. But now he has the track record, and the chickens are coming home to roost because he has made all these conflicting promises. We're not going to cut Medicaid, but we're going to cut $1.5 trillion in spending. These things are not compatible mathematically. It's impossible to make it work. They're trying to make the math work right now, but the math is not mathing. That's what they're going to try to accomplish over these next few days, and then it's going to go to the Senate and get changed and sent back to the House. So they have this really ambitious timeline that they're trying to push through. I do think the pressure's going to be enormous from Trump to vote yes, so I think they get it done somehow, but I think it's going to take some time.
I saw a graphic today, Jason, that said no one in the country, there's not a place in the country where Medicaid cuts are popular with more than 15% of the people in that place, which to me says, I don't know if the bill in its current form is going to survive.
It probably won't, but here's the thing. Anytime you mention Medicaid, people get angry, right? They're upset, yeah, you're going to touch my Medicaid, even if they don't understand the nuances about it. The problem is, and this is not something that people used to say about Republicans, they have a terrible messaging problem on this too. Like, if you could talk about fraud or abuse or waste or something else like that, if they found a way to sort of have a Doge narrative about Medicaid, they might be able to get by with this, but they can't, because all they sound like is your sort of obnoxious brother-in-law who wants to put, mom and dad, in a terrible retirement home. That's what they sound like whenever they talk about Medicare and Medicaid. So they can't message it properly, in addition to the fact that morally it's a terrible thing to do. They'll make some changes. They won't destroy it, but they will impact it in a way that won't make people happy, certainly heading into 2026.
Fun fact, lots of people actually benefit from Medicaid.